We're back for the next installment of our summer series covering, again, we actually have a movie each week to cover. And this time we have the return of one of our personal favorite franchises. But is this the installment that we were expecting? I don't necessarily think so. And as far as what that does for the movie quality, we're going to find out. I'm joined once again by Luk Reviews. I'm, of course, Dom, the movie nerd. Luke, are you ready to review Transformers Rise of the Beasts?
Well, after one of our most positive episodes last week, I think it's only right that we contrast it with one of our most episodes.
Yes, I agree. I was worried you were going to go with a little bit of a different direction there, but I couldn't agree more with that statement. All of that and more on today's episode of the Talking TV podcast. What's going on, everybody? Happy almost summer. I know it's always weird because like the colleges always get out at the end of May, but the high schoolers don't get out until close to the end of June. So it's always weird as far as how we officially start our summer season. But for us movie fans, we're almost a month into the summer already. We're recording this a little bit early. I am currently on vacation in Virginia right now, but I'm actually going to be heading home today. But that was never going to stop me from podcasting, especially when it comes to possibly my favorite film franchise of all time. Like, it's funny because I've gone down this rabbit hole a lot. I've thought about it as far as like what are my favorite film franchises of all time. You know, there's your Harry Potters, your Lord of the Rings, your Marvels, all of your Pixar movies, which I know that each one of those, it's like a series of micro franchises, but I kind of consider it all under one blanket terminology. I've recently been getting into Studio Ghibli, but man, I mean, Luke, we did our Michael Bay episode last year in preparation for Ambulance when that came out. And Ambulance, I'm going to make the argument that Ambulance was the true return to the theaters, even though everybody can, say what they want it to be. Some people can say it was No Way Home. Some people could say it was Top Gun. Some people could say it was Avatar, whatever they want. For us, I think it was Ambulance personally, just because that movie was just like, yes, this is what COVID movies of the last couple of years have been missing. And so naturally, when they announced it, I believe it was during COVID. I believe it was during COVID that we were going to be getting the next live action Transformers movie. It was supposed to come out last year, like many other movies. It was delayed to this summer. And so I think before we actually get into this movie, we need to break down the history of this franchise because, well, we touched upon it a little bit in our Michael Bayhem or our Bayhem episode that we did last year where we ranked all of Michael Bay's movies. I don't think we actually got a chance to talk about the Transformers as a franchise, at least not on this podcast. I was originally planning on doing a first-time watch series of all of the Michael Transformers. We never first got to do that just for timing purposes. But Luke, I wanted to know your thoughts. What's it called? When were you first introduced to the Transformers movies? And what are your thoughts on the franchise as a whole?
Well, I don't remember exactly when, but it would have been when I was on the younger side, somewhere around probably 2010 or so, when I would have been 8 years old. The first one I saw in theaters was Age of Extinction, and it was a very delightful cinematic experience for a 12-year-old me. Same year as Amazing Spider-Man 2, so I guess, and Interstellar. So 2014, big year for my
Great
movie
year.
development taste. Yeah, but then I rewatched it over and over again, just like, it's not my favorite franchise, I would say, probably not even top 5, but somehow I always go back to it. Like, the only one I really don't like is The Last Night. The rest of them are either good to okay. Revenge of the Fallen, I'm not as high on it as you are, but it's kind of meh. Better than Rise of the Beasts, I'll tell you that. But yeah, it's just big cars. That's what always drawn me. And this one, like, there's not even cars anymore. Like, what's the point?
Well, I mean, you got Mirage. He's a Porsche. You get a little bit of Bumblebee in this
Yeah, but
movie.
half of them are animals and they don't even do anything.
Well, we'll get into that. As far as, like I said, I think that goes into like the history and the lore of the Transformers. I think for the most part, I tend to agree with you on the Michael Bay movies. Like these movies have like a very, very special place in my heart. The first movie I saw like in theaters, that was like, I believe that was the first. It's funny because I always talk about how Marvel is like one of the only franchises that I've watched every single installment in theaters, but that's actually not true. The Transformers movies as well. going back to like when the first movie came out, I remember those trailers being like, I had no idea what it was. And I remember we had a family friend that was like massively into them and like explained the whole lore of like the Autobots and the Decepticons and how they're aliens that come from this planet called Cybertron and how they've been fighting this giant civil war and how their war eventually makes its way to Earth. As far as the cause of the war, that kind of changes depending on which timeline you follow. There's a lot of different timelines that have been established throughout the course of its history. It originally started as an animated show in the 80s that had several successful sequels and spin-off shows. Some of the conflict is over their life source, which is Energon. Some of it ties over, certain artifacts that tie into their lore and mythos, such as things like the Allspark, the Matrix of Leadership, and such. And so I watched the first Michael Bay Transformers movie when it came out in theaters back in 2007. I was 10 years old, and I have talked about this pretty much to anyone who will listen, which is that movie was such a special, like, foundational part of my childhood. I know everybody has criticized these movies to death as far as Michael Bay's just blatant, flagrant, like, use of what's called of oversexed female characters. And well, I can't exactly say that they are wrong. I mean, for a 10-year-old male child, it's like it's Megan Fox in those movies. It's just absolutely perfect. And as far as the plot for that first movie goes, it's simple. It's a boy and his dog movie combined with a giant alien invasion war effort mixed in with the government conspiracy. And I think the biggest problem that comes from the sequels is their tendency to get really repetitive, which is that they always tie into some event from human history. There's always a conspiracy wrapped in a mystery that goes into some government cover up, and it always ends in a gigantic blast shoot 'em up battle. But what I'll say is that tying it in is really close to Michael Bay. And it's funny, I wrote about this in my review for Rise of the Beasts, in the sense that the thing that sets myself apart, like, I'm a big fan of the Transformers lore. Like, I really, really, really dig the lore. Whenever, like, and that's also part of the reason why I'm big into the Transformers TV shows, because all of the animated Transformers television shows, they've dove in really into the lore in a really exciting and interesting way. I could never really get into the G1 show. That was just always a little bit too corny for my taste. But I think really where I got invested was when I watched the Transformers Beast Wars cartoons in high school, because that show was just ahead of its time in a lot of different ways. I remember I watched Transformers Cybertron with my brothers. I watched Transformers Prime, was a big fan of that. And then recently I watched Netflix did a CG animated anime Transformers 3-part miniseries, they called it. It was a 3 different series of 6 episodes. They all tied into each other. The first part was their escape from Cybertron. The second part was their searching for the Allspark throughout space. And the third part, they actually landed on prehistoric Earth and actually had their interactions with the Maximals and Predacons. So you've been seeing the Beasts iteration of Transformers making their way into the lore and into the pop culture lexicon much more and more recently, especially given how critically how critically beloved the Beast Wars cartoon is. But so that's, I guess, the thing that has always set me apart from Transformers fans. Is the problem is that my template, my starting point, my entry to these movies, unlike a lot of diehard Transformers fans who started with the 80s TV show, my entry point was the Michael Bay movies. And for me, that's always going to be kind of like what I base my enjoyment of these movies on. And I know that's going to set me at odds with a lot of people, but like, I just finished rewatching all the Bay movies, and it's just, I love them. There's like you said, there was a reason why they're not the best movies. Even I have to admit that, but there was a reason why I just keep coming. They're just so much fun. Again, they are gonzo. They're ridiculous. It's one of the only times where everything that the critics say about these movies is 100% accurate and correct, and it does not deter my enjoyment even a little bit. Michael Bay has always been a guy that has been very critically reviled, but he just doesn't care, and he does what he does, and he shoots his movies like nobody else, and nobody can tell me ever or convince me ever that anybody makes a movie that looks anything like his. So with that being said, unfortunately, like you said, the Last Night, which was the last Michael Bay movie that he directed, even I can't defend that one. Like I could defend Revenge of the Fall, like, and Dark of the Moon. I can have a pretty good argument for why I think Dark of the Moon is a legitimately great movie. I could defend Age of Extinction to an extent, although that movie has a lot of problems in hindsight. Because, like you said, the more and more that you rewatch it, the more and more the problems start to rear their ugly heads. Because you're like, I'm sorry, that movie's almost 3 hours long. There is absolutely no defense for that at all. And then the Last Night, I rewatched that, and I'm like, I can't make heads or tails of this movie. Like, I couldn't make heads or tails of it when I saw it back in theaters in 2017. I was 20 years old when that came. I realized that I'd been spending a decade of my life with these movies, and I'm like, okay, this needs to stop. And so, but the problem is that kind of became the linchpin of this franchise, is that these movies were too profitable. Like, the movies were critically reviled every single time, but these movies made so much money. It's funny because like I remember I was talking with some of my coworkers at my old job, and we were talking about Fast and Furious for a similar thing, because it's a similar thing with Fast and Furious, where they're like, why do they keep making these movies? I'm like, because these movies make stupid amounts of money. Everybody thought that Age of Extinction was going to bomb, and it ended up being the highest grossing movie of the year that it came out. Like, these movies always hit billion-dollar revenue streams. So the problem that Paramount, the studio, finds himself in is they want to move this franchise on from Michael Bay. They want to move this franchise and keep it going because it's too big of a moneymaker for them. But they want to remove it from Michael Bay. They want to bring it back to, like, the kid-friendly thing. And I think the ultimate problem with that is they removed the reason for the movie's success, because you have the Bumblebee spinoff, which is a prequel of sorts, even though tonally it looks and shares nothing of similarity with the Michael Bay movies.
I think it was originally planned as a prequel, and then they said, okay, it's a reboot, actually.
Yeah, like people can still call these movies prequels, but like I think it's safe to say that after this one, like this is a full-on reboot. So we got the Bumblebee movie, and I know a lot of people like that movie, but it just didn't do it for me. It was too corny. I thought it was too like I thought it was kind of in the wave of like what I like to call new Hollywood filmmaking, which is that it doesn't have an ounce of spark, if you will, pun intended. I am crushing it with these puns right now, and it felt too derivative of other things, And while the effects and the fight sequences were certainly good, it lacked the magic that the first one had. And I was hoping that with the change in director for this one, we would be able to avoid that situation going into this. Again, I know a lot of people are going to really enjoy this because they're like, yes, this is everything I wanted. This is the Autobots without the crass Michael Bay immaturity and insane action and way of shooting. And you got the Maximals in there. You got Unicron in there, after he was hinted at in the last night. And while I will say that this movie, as far as improvements, I want to go in and talk about some good stuff first. But as far as improvements over Bumblebee, I can say, first off, great actually having a full cast of Transformers this time around. I should also probably preface this by saying that I'm not going to review this like a conventional movie, because like I said, Transformers is very, very near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to be reviewing this like a true fanboy, not necessarily as a film critic, if you will. But I like getting a full cast of Transformers this time around. That always helps. I'm like, Transformers is supposed to be an ensemble piece. You like seeing the Autobots together. You like seeing the Decepticons together. So the fact that we got a whole movie with just Bumblebee after we'd spent 5 movies where Bumblebee was one of the 2 centerpiece Transformers, I'm like, I even said this, I'm like, this is almost like a rule baked into these movies, is that you can't have a Transformers movie without Optimus Prime, and you can't have a Transformers movie without Bumblebee. And then Bumblebee kind of broke that rule, because outside of the opening sequence, which is just incredible of that movie, you spend a whole movie with just Bumblebee pretty much as a dog, and it's kind of confusing, especially when you start that movie with him as this like badass warrior. And so you have that movie, and now you have Rise of the Beasts, which, like I said, I feel like we don't really need to dive into the plot, because I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, because all these movies kind of follow a similar structure pattern, which is where, again, there's a MacGuffin that they need to find in order to stop a great evil, and it always ends in a giant action smash and grab. So I think it's funny that the amount of people who criticize the Michael Bay movies but are giving this movie a pass is kind of insane, because I think structure-wise, this movie pretty much follows the same structure as any one of the
It's
Michael
shorter.
Bay.
It's definitely shorter than all the other Michael Bay movies.
For sure.
I definitely noticed that. I'm like, oh, it's over. That was quick.
Yeah.
Because I rewatched the first one just because I hadn't watched it in a while. Oh, so good. And the VFX are still better than in the new one. I stand by that.
I've been saying that for years now. It's crazy. I'm like, how have the effects gotten worse? I mean, I feel like if you want to look at a perfect example as to how the VFX industry has been treated in Hollywood progressively and how it's evolved over time, just look at the Transformers movie. Because they've progressively gotten worse and more cartoony looking with each one. But no, because you're right. Because like, sure, I mean, I guess the effects and the fight sequences, they're clearer for sure. Like, I can see like every transformation sequence. I can see every character for sure. It's not like over bloated with characters. But I mean, maybe to an extent. But at the same time, it's like, okay, but I'm like, I guess the biggest difference between this one and the first one is that this one, I felt like I was watching a cartoon, and not in a good way, versus the first ones, it's like those felt like real movies. Like, they felt visceral. They felt on the ground. Like, you felt like you were there. Like, when they're blasted apart in Egypt or in Chicago or in China or wherever the hell they were the last night, or in LA in the first one, like, you feel like you're there. You feel like you're viscerally on the ground, And I did not get that.
A lot of people are calling this movie perfect Saturday morning cartoon, as if it's like a good thing. I'm like,
yeah.
I don't think that's a good thing, to be honest.
Yeah, that's definitely going to have to be one of those terms that we reevaluate as time goes on and as more of these movies come out, because I feel like that's a term that a lot of people have been throwing out. A lot of internet critics who we love to criticize as far as not really know what they're talking about. And I feel like that's something that we're going to need to examine as far as what actually makes for a good quote unquote Saturday morning cartoon. Because, yeah, I'm just like, I am torn. Like, I really am, because this movie is not all bad. I feel like we were on like a little bit opposite of the spectrum. Like, I'm on the mess side, leaning towards good, but at the same time, like, I can't ignore the criticisms per se. So I guess we should start by diving into this. How familiar are you with the Beast Wars and the Maximals as well? Because I believe you said that this was a point where that's kind of where the movie lost you a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the lore at all. The most I've seen from the Beast Wars show is that like the CGI in that is not
Yeah,
great,
it's
but that's about it. This is the first time hearing of an Optimus Primal or a Cheetor and a Razor, a Rhinox. Like, come on, you can't get a little creative with the names, like Cheetor. Like, come on.
It's funny because when you say that, it sounds ridiculous, but I promise you when I say that, outside of the CG, which is very dated, the Beast Wars iteration of Transformers might be the best iteration of Transformers that there has been in the TV form. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that, because like I think the biggest thing is, it's like the Beast Wars is probably, I think the reason why so many people relate to that show is because that's the first Transformers where they sure for like I never got outside of the movie, the 1984 movie that they did in between at the halfway point of the original 84 show, of the original 80s show, where they like killed off half the cast, including Optimus Prime, only to then bring him back during the course of the show because they realized they're like, yeah, we can't have Transformers without Optimus Prime. It doesn't work. So basically, to give you a little bit of a crash course in the Beast Wars. So the Beast Wars, the Beast iterations, right? You got the Maximals and the Predacons. They're the descendants in the future of the Autobots and the Decepticons. And what happens is that through a rift in the space-time continuum at the course of the TV show, they travel back in time and actually land on prehistoric Earth before the during the events of when the Autobots and the Decepticons crashed on Earth. Because basically, when the Autobots and the Decepticons, when they were escaping Cybertron, they were fighting over Earth. Both their ships crash landed on the planet, and there was a period of several passing of thousands of years until they were reawakened by a volcano going off in the modern day. So Beast Wars takes place in between that time period, when they crash landed on Earth versus when they woke up. And basically what happens is that it starts out, they think they're on an alien planet, and because of the time period when they crash landed, there are obviously no cars and trucks, there's no technology. So what they are forced to scan is they are forced to scan the forms of animals as their alternate modes. And while I will admit that the names of them are certainly uncreative, like, it's the 90s, they're trying to come up with what's it called? They're basically just going off the names of the names. And if you think the Maximal names are bad, just wait till you hear the names of the Predacons, the Decepticon descendants, because oh my god. Well, first off, Megatron, they don't even try to get creative with that. They're just like, oh, it's just Megatron. He just has the same. It's not the same Megatron, but he just has the name as the original. But the other ones, that's where you got the names of Dinobot and Scorponok that originated from. I bet you can guess what they transform into. You got Waspinator, you have Pterosaur, you have Black Arachnia, and then you got an ant Predacon that they just call Inferno. Why? Because he has a gun that shoots fire. Like that, it is the laziest part of the show for sure. But what I will say is that it ends up getting very existential, very philosophical. Like, there's actually a lot, like, you end up like getting attached to these characters in a way that you would not expect to at all. There's actually a lot of like really tragic deaths on there as well. The show actually does get really violent and drops a lot of bodies in the last couple shows, and especially when it turns into when they realize that they have kind of this existentially supposed to be evolving to protect their predecessors as well in order to preserve the timeline. The show elevates to a whole different level as well. And so while it does have that course for sure, there is like a lot of really good stuff to love about it. And by the way, I will say that of all the Maximals, they only included 4, and they did not include my personal fan favorite Maximal, that being Rat Trap. But I guess they probably couldn't justify.
I have heard of Rat Trap.
Yes, Rat Trap is indeed kind of the he's the wisecracker, the Joker of the group, and what's it called? And I guess that feasibly they probably thought that it's like, okay, we probably can't have a giant rat running around with a cheetah and a rhino and a gorilla. That wouldn't exactly make sense. So, needless to say, they have not adapted the Beast Wars entirely. They've changed a lot about it. I actually, because that was always my biggest question is I'm like, okay, so we got the Autobots and the Maximals in this. How is this going to work out exactly? And they ended up, I think in terms of like meshing the two of them together, I think that was the best part. I think that's the part that they handled the best. I think that actually, surprisingly enough, the arc that they gave Optimus Prime in this movie is interesting in the sense that this is the first time ever in live action that Optimus Prime has actually had an arc. Because one of the biggest criticisms I think that I have personally had about the Michael Bay Transformers movies is that the Transformers themselves are not really characters. They're kind of just mouthpieces for exposition and terrible jokes, and then just other than that, just complete harbingers of destruction. Like, I'm sorry, like, you cannot tell me what character traits Ironhide and Sideswipe and Ratchet and the racist twins from Revenge of the Fallen.
One's an ambulance, one's a pickup truck.
Exactly, you're making my point for me. They do not have very distinct personality traits and characteristics. And I can't exactly say that that's exactly the case for this one, other than okay, there's a female Transformer now, and she speaks instead of just, there being three of them and shooting it up. And one of them is voiced by Pete Davidson, and one of them is voiced by Danny Rojas from Ted Lasso. And as far as the Autobots go, and as far as the Maximals go, I mean, Cheetor and Rhinox, I think Cheetor gets like 2 lines in the whole movie, and Rhinox, if he talks at all, I don't hear him. But obviously, again, like the focus here is Optimus Prime for the Autobots, and obviously Pete Davidson, Mirage, who they've kind of replaced Bumblebee as like kind of the human interface. And then for the Maximal side, you have Optimus Primal, voiced by Ron Perlman, the leader of the Maximals, and Air Razor. And basically what's established in this chronology, this timeline, is that the Maximals are established as these guardians of the Transwarp Key, which is needed in order to transport Unicron from place to place. This is also the first live-action appearance of Unicron, the World Eater, who is established in the Transformers lore as the ancient enemy of Primus, who is the original Transformer, who is the soul of their home planet, Cybertron. And in the original 80s movie, Unicron was established who transformed and corrupted Megatron into Galvatron as kind of his herald, his Silver Surfer, if you will. We're going to come back to that one. And he basically kind of engaged the new war with the Autobots after the death of Optimus Prime, in which Hot Rod is forced to step up and assume the position of the Matrix of Leadership and assume the position of the new Prime, Rodimus Prime.
Yes,
and
Hot Rod, my favorite French-speaking Transformer.
He did not have a French accent in the original movie. But yeah, so this is the first instance we get of Unicron. And the whole thing is that Unicron, this is where I was a little bit confused. I'm like, wait, I thought Unicron could travel on his own. I didn't realize he needed this Transwarp Key to travel from place to place. So that was like my first part where I was scratching my head and questioning it. But I was like, okay. And then so Unicron basically sends out, rather than corrupting the Decepticons, this is also I would also like to say this is the first instance of live action Transformers installment where we get no Decepticons at all. There's no Megatron, no Starscream, none of the two, no Shockwave, no Soundwave, none of the two that we got in the last one. What were their names? Dropkick, and I forgot the red one that Angela Bassett voiced. We don't get any of the Decepticons. Instead, we get the Terrorcons, who in this instance are the minions of Unicron. You get Scourge, the voiced by Dinklage. You get Battletrap, voiced by David Sobolov, and you get Nightbird, voiced by I don't even know if that's the right one, voiced by MJ Rodriguez. And they're kind of like your generic villains. They go to a place, they get the thing, they serve their master. They kind of really don't have any distinct personal characteristics outside of that. But so I guess we've been talking a lot about the Transformers that I haven't necessarily. So I guess in order to like kind of finish off the plot. So basically, you have the beginning of the movie starts on the Maximals' homeworld, which they don't exactly say where it is, but you basically have the previous leader of the Maximals who also transforms into a gorilla. I think his name is Ape Link or something like that. He is not a canon Maximal at all. Giving the Transwarp Key to Optimus and the rest of the Maximals to tell them to escape before Scourge kills him. They escape off the planet with the Transwarp Key before Scourge can give it to Unicron, but Unicron consumes their planet, and they're established to have escaped to Earth and have been there for thousands of years and have split up the Transwarp Key. Flash forward to the modern day, you get the human characters, which we'll get into them, but basically in order to set up what the Autobot struggle is, the Autobots have been stuck on Earth for about 7 years since the events of Bumblebee. There's one throwaway line where they reference that this is indeed a sequel to Bumblebee, because outside of that line and their designs, you wouldn't guess that it is, because none of the characters from Bumblebee make their appearance, not even John Cena, which was a little bit confusing to me, but what's it called? So this is an entirely new cast, entirely new setting where we switch from the West Coast to the East Coast. We're in Brooklyn now. And essentially the Autobots want the Transwarp Key so that they can get back to Cybertron. Optimus Prime is dead set on getting back. He believes that they abandoned the planet to death too early, and that that Earth was only meant to be a pit stop for them while they regrouped their efforts and then went back to Cybertron. And I'm like, well, that doesn't do so well considering that there's only 5 Autobots left on Earth. You have Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, RC, Mirage voiced by Pete Davidson, and Wheeljack voiced by Cristo Fernandez, aka Daddy Rojas. Those are the only Autobots that we get in this movie. And let me get into the humans. And I think it's safe to say, I don't know for you, but for me, the humans have always been the weakest link of these movies. But I guess the difference is that because of the way that Michael Bay directs them, they've always just been so entertaining that I don't necessarily care. Going from Shia LaBeouf and John Turturro in the first three to Mark Wahlberg and whoever his sidekicks are in the last two. And then Haley Steinfeld is good. I love Haley Steinfeld. She's awesome. But yeah, I think it's safe to say Anthony Ramos and Dominique Fishback are not doing it for me in this movie. They're good actors. They're trying with what they got. They're giving them a corny message. Anthony Ramos is a, struggling up and coming guy who's like, he's trying to support his sick younger brother. He's a former Army med, but he can't get a job. And of course, it's like corny, terrible movie writing where it's like, oh, you were in the Army, but you couldn't work as part of a team. And I'm like, gee, I wonder where this could possibly be going as far as his arc goes. And Dominique Fishback, I'm sorry, I don't think I've seen a more obvious instance of somebody who has no idea, who just cannot act opposite a green screen than Dominique Fishback, who is a terrific actor. Or if you watch Swarm earlier this year, the Donald Glover miniseries, she was absolutely spectacular and just jaw-droppingly visceral in that show. But I think it's safe to say for me, Luke, I don't know about you, that the humans in this movie just did not do it for me.
Yeah, I don't know. They didn't feel like they were really on an adventure with Transformers. Like, oh, this is a thing that happens. Let's just keep going. And I don't know. I mentioned this this is the only thing I wrote in my review. No one sweats in this movie, so it just doesn't feel real. In every movie, Shia LaBeouf is actually drenched in sweat. He's running around with a cube or running through the desert trying to revive Optimus or whatever he does in those movies. He's always sweating. Everyone is sweating. This one, he
blows off a Transformer's head.
Exactly.
He blows off Starscream's head in Dark of the Moon, and he's sweaty and filthy. No, you're 100%
right.
This
one, and I thought Anthony Ramos might break out into song at one point.
Yeah, right.
With his In the Heights appearance, but am I supposed to now accept Anthony Ramos as the next big action star? I don't know. I'm not convinced of that.
Yeah, I don't exactly think of Anthony Ramos and big name action star. Say what you will about Mark Wahlberg. I know a lot of people are critical of Mark Wahlberg, and I understandably so, considering that Shia LaBeouf was like a quintessential part of those movies. But at least you'll think of Mark Wahlberg as an action star. I don't think of Anthony Ramos as an action star at all. And again, he was definitely better than Dominique Fishback. But yeah, there were definitely points where I'm like, yeah, I don't buy his specifically the moment where he calls them all together to do their final regroup so they can charge the giant structure that just builds out of nowhere. Which since when does a transwarp key generate an entire structure that shoots a Marvel beam into outer space?
I would say I have missed the sky beam. We haven't seen it for
we haven't seen the sky beam in a minute.
So
but although I will say I had a couple problems with the whole Unicron sense of it, both in that because the sky beam they literally were ripping themselves off, because for as much as people criticize Dark of the Moon, the way that they were bringing Unicron to Earth aesthetically looked exactly the same as in Dark of the Moon when they were trying to bring Cybertron to Earth the first time. Almost exactly aesthetically the same, only way cornier. So that was a little bit confusing. Also, plot-wise, I was a little bit confused that essentially, with the exception of the MacGuffin, this is pretty much the exact same plot line as as Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, where you get a giant planet-eating destroyer of worlds that needs to send his harbinger down to ready the planet for his arrival. The only difference here is the manner in which they do that. But that was something that I noticed immediately. I don't know if it was because of the late 2000s looking CGI, or if it was just the manner of the plot. I don't realize when I realized that, but or maybe it was the globe-trotting nature, because I know that in Rise of the Silver Surfer, they went to other locations around the planet. But I was just wow, this is even with the manner in which Unicron was speaking to Scourge in all of those instances, I will say though, and I still, this is something that I still have not quite found as to whether this is a positive or a negative. Most interesting voice cast for a Transformers movie in a while, because obviously you have your regulars, Peter Cullen, John DiMaggio, who I think has had a voiceover in every one of these movies. Let me just break down some of these voiceovers. So obviously we have Pete Davidson as Mirage, the human counterpart, which I don't know about you. I have my problems with him in this movie. I have the pop culture.
I enjoyed him. I think he was I never felt that a Transformer that had more personality than him in the movie. That's the one main positive I can garner.
I
Like,
don't know. I
maybe,
think this, in a weird way, everybody's always criticized Pete Davidson for not being that good of an actor, and like especially now because of how big of a celebrity he is, just kind of his celebrity being distracting. And for the most part, I've tended to disagree, but largely because a lot of the stuff that I've really liked him in are things that have been built around him, like Big Time Adolescence, King of Staten Island, and Bupkis are all purposefully built around him. And in a sense, like you could say a similar thing about Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. The Suicide Squad, he's in such a small part that it doesn't even matter. Like the way in which the Dispatch's character is so comical that it's that again you would be forgiven for like not even remembering that he's in the movie. But here it's like I think this is the first time ever where Pete Davidson as a celebrity has been distracting, because while I can't say that he's bad, I am never once saying that like, oh, it's a transformer interacting with a human. I'm just like, oh, it's Pete Davidson as a transformer. And like whatever and the fact that he like sounds so different from the rest of the Autobots, even Wheeljack, who like Wheeljack gets one line which I'm like, okay, this I don't even think this works as like an attempt at like a woke joke where he's like, oh, I speak Spanish, but I sound like I'm talking with a Spanish
yeah,
accent, but I'm not Spanish, so that's racist. I'm like, what? I'm like, first of all, how does a transformer even know about racism? That doesn't even make sense. You can't have it both ways. But yeah, so that's kind of like where my problems with Pete Davidson come in. You have Peter Dinklage as Scourge, the leader of the Terrorcons, Unicron's harbingers. Which again, okay, it's Peter Dinklage voicing another generic villain. There's really no personality. He has a few interesting lines with Prime. He does something interesting in the beginning that like kind of sets him really at heavy odds with Prime. And when he's kind of mocking him, he's like, oh, this is the great Optimus Prime. Primus would be disappointed. I thought those were cool, because those are all the bits that tie into the Transformers lore. But as far as his personality and his character, I'm like, whatever. But for me, like easily, and I think it's hilarious that you like mentioned like how corny their names were. But for me, these scene stealers and the reason to watch the movie are Ron Perlman as Optimus Primal and Michelle Yeoh as Air Razor. I think those two are absolutely spectacular. I think whenever those two are on screen, that's where the movie is cooking, especially since Primal is supposed to be like kind of the yin to Optimus Prime's yang, because Prime is a little bit like, Prime's been like kind of burned out and kind of been on a little bit of an angry tear for the last couple times we've seen him, really since Age of Extinction, and understandably so, because the humans that he has laid down his life for so often just kind of turned on him and his kind. But this one, again, we get a little bit more of a battle craze, a little bit more of a world weary Prime. He's a little bit angry. He's like, I'm just trying to get home to Cybertron, screw these humans, all that. What's it called? He's like, these humans will turn on us at the first moment they get, which I can't necessarily say that he's wrong in 2023. But then when he meets Primal and they meet up with the Maximals later on, Primal's like, the mission comes first. We are happy to sacrifice and lay down our lives for these humans. It's not about us. It's about the greater cause. And I guess that's it. And I guess that kind of is an interesting positive, because when you throw up the existential threat of the Maximals, where they have to defend against a literal planet eater, as opposed to Optimus, who just wants to get back to Cybertron to protect his Autobots in order to, get back to the status quo, quote unquote. And that part actually was an interesting struggle. So I like that. And Perlman is a transformer. I don't think I've ever seen a more perfect melding of an actor's skills with a certain with a certain set of characters. And the same can be said for Michelle Yeoh as Air Razor, where she's the first Maximal that the Autobots meet, and she brings this kind of serene calmness to it, and there's something really sad and tragic that happens with the two of them as kind of like, the two leaders and vocal set pieces of the Maximals that happens halfway through the movie, that I think actually sets them on a really interesting arc before kind of the final battle, which is just your usual like clunking together of metal, So what's it called? So with all that being said, like what did you think of? So what were your thoughts on like the individual performances and arcs that the Transformers had?
yeah, I do agree that Optimus actually had somewhat of an arc. Usually, just like, we must protect the humans, and of course, there's always the end speech where he's like, whatever,
Those iconic end speech,
and
the end speech voice followed by Linkin Park song.
then Linkin Park starts playing. Yeah, I just enjoyed the dynamic between some of the Transformers. I guess it like you mentioned, having the ensemble back after Bumblebee is quite nice. But yeah, there's only a few of them that actually stand out. Like, they sidelined B for like the whole movie, which, why? He's like everyone's favorite. Why would you do that? Like, maybe they just couldn't think of any more references that he could say through the radio, which I've always enjoyed, the gimmick of him talking through the radio.
Yeah, but I will say though, this movie they got particularly obnoxious, like particularly obnoxious.
Yeah, but there was a great joke about Optimus says to him like I'm not gonna let you go to that drive-in movie theater anymore. I did enjoy that,
That was
but
good.
some of the other stuff was a little bit on the nose, uh, but still, yeah, like we mentioned, Cheetor and Rhinox, they have no lines.
Which for
Uh,
me, that particularly killed me because Cheetor and Rhinox are such a distinct, have such distinct characteristics in the Beast Wars cartoon. Cheetor is kind of like the kid of the group. You know, he's kind of the overeager one, but he matures and grows a lot as the series goes on. And Rhinox is kind of like the voice of sage wisdom. He's their tech help. Optimus has often said that Rhinox could easily lead the Maximals in his place, you know, and they just essentially make him like their big gun in this one. And I don't think Rhinox has a single line in this, which is particularly distressing for me personally. Because I like if you watch the original Beast Wars cartoon, like Rhinox is easily one of the best characters.
yeah, RC and Wheeljack don't really do much. I did enjoy the few Stratosphere lines that he had. Like
Yeah.
I'm very Scottish. And I'm a big
For no reason.
warplane. No, that was just random but fun. Michelle Yeoh, I liked Michelle Yeoh, but I didn't think the Air Razor was much. And then, like you said, Ron Perlman was the standout
Yeah.
of the whole film, probably.
Yes, easily. Also, I will say, and I would forgive people for not realizing this, but you have another gigantic, or reasonably big name actor. You have Colman Domingo of Euphoria, Candyman, and Zola fame recently, voicing Unicron, which you would be forgiven for not recognizing him as voicing Unicron because it's kind of a generic voice. I will also point out for fans of the Transformers mythos, and Luke, I'm not sure if you were familiar with, but in Unicron's first debut appearance in the Transformers 80s animated film, Orson Welles, the late great Orson
Yeah,
Welles,
this I do know.
lent his voice performance to Unicron in his final role before his death shortly thereafter. And I believe that, again, Orson Welles was greatly known for being a relentless alcoholic in those later days. He would shoot many commercials without even remembering or that he did them or realizing that he did them. And I believe that in his final eulogy in his final speech before his death, he stated that my last performance was I was voicing a toy. Something along those lines. And that is just will always be something of great amusement to me. But yeah, like I said, outside of the Transformers mythos, the plot itself is kind of really generic. Like I said, it's another like just basic smash and grab. Find the MacGuffin. Oh no, the bad guys have the MacGuffin. Oh no, they're gonna open the portal and bring in the big bad. We have to stop them. All of that. You know, you have Pete Davidson. The Mirage gets badly injured, so he has to form an exo battle suit with Anthony Ramos's character. When they fight at the end, you know, you get some cool transformation sequences. I will say that my heart did skip a beat when I heard Primal scream "maximize," which is basically what the Maximals say when they transform. You know, instead of saying roll out or just transforming in general, they always say maximize, and then before they transform into their robot modes, which for me was always that, and I even almost did it in like the vocal inclinations of the original voice actor Gary Chalk. So that definitely that kind of hit me in the nostalgia feels right there. But so couple points that I want to talk about, a little bit spoiler heavy. You know, like I said, there haven't been too many spoilers to talk about, but like you mentioned, they sideline beat for the movie. They have at the beginning of the movie, and I'm still questioning why they do this. I'm guessing they only do this so they can give Optimus Prime like an actual arc, which is that at the beginning of the movie, when they're fighting, when the Autobots are fighting with the Terrorcons for the first time, Scourge kills Bumblebee like out of nowhere, and like. This is not the first time we have seen a Transformer die and come back to life in the same movie. Famously, this was what happened with Optimus Prime in Revenge of the Fallen, where Megatron stabs him, forcing Sam to have to go and find the Matrix of Leadership in order to bring him back. But the difference is that is the focus of the movie because they need Optimus back in order to defeat the Fallen because Optimus is the only one who's able to do it. And in this one, they just kill B so they can just get him out of the way for Optimus to have an arc and hate Scourge, only to then bring him back with a ludicrous explanation. It's like, oh, there's a secret energon deposit here on this spot on Earth, but it's dormant, and so only a specific energy blast can bring it back. I'm like, oh, okay, so you already ruined like I'm like, first of all, it would have actually been really interesting and really ballsy if you took arguably the most popular Autobot and actually killed him off. Like that would be really interesting because like even in the animated movie back in 84 where they're dropping bodies left and right. Optimus dies, Ironhide dies, Ratchet dies, Wheeljack dies, where Ultra Magnus dies, where they're dropping bodies left and right. You're never once worried that Bumblebee is going to die. And this is the first real instance where you're actually worried that Bumblebee's going to die. And then they just
I
bring him
wasn't
back.
worried. I
Right.
wasn't worried at all. Like, oh, I saw the clip in the trailer of him jumping out of the
Right,
plane.
exactly. You're like, okay, well, so they already spoiled that. So that was a point where I'm like, oh well, okay, you just way to just deflate the tension right out of that. The second major instance is the corruption of AirRaiser, which is a sad moment for sure, especially after it's established that again Optimus and Primal, I should say, and AirRaiser have this bond as kind of like like when they meet up, they haven't seen each other in years because for whatever reason Optimus, Cheetor, and Rhinox are hiding out in Peru, guiding one piece of the Transwarp drive, while AirRaiser hides the other piece and then goes to another piece of the part of the planet. So they haven't seen each other in several thousand years. And so they finally reunite. Well, first what happens is that you have the thing where it's established that like, oh, Scourge has the ability to infect other Transformers with Unicron's dark energy. And so during when they first get to Peru, during the Autobots and Terrorcons second fight, AirRaiser is there to help them, but Scourge infects her by shooting like this disc thing under her wing that like starts infecting her with Unicron's dark energy. So they reunite with the Maximals, and then AirRaiser, starts being corrupted and ends up giving the Transwarp drive to Scourge, and then starts attacking Dominique Fishback's character. And Primal is forced to kill her in a very, very tragic scene. And I'm just like, and that part for me, I will say, like I said, because Perlman and Michelle Yeoh are so much better than this movie calls for. That scene is actually like quite tragic when Michelle Yeoh is like, you have the thing where it's like, fight the corruption. And she's like, I can't. Unicron's too strong. The mission comes first. You have to kill me. And so Primal is forced to kill her, which the way that he kills her, I'm a little bit confused by. Like, what did he do? What did he choke her out? Like, because I thought that he was gonna like, because again, that's the thing that also differentiates it. They're very clearly trying to make this a lot more kid friendly. They're not at all trying to be like the Michael Bay movie, which got so viscerally violent in terms of how they blew apart. Like, you literally had an agent in the beginning of Age of Extinction lockdown sucking Ratchet's spark out, which was just like, it was so like unbelievably violent, and just yet another instance of them flexing with the PG-13 rating. But so like I don't know what was he like hugging her to death? Like it said that he
I don't remember. I don't remember.
Like so just because of like how that sequence was mapped out. And then you have the final big bad fight. You have this instance where Optimus is like, oh, I have to destroy the because it's like Elena's going to shut it down. The whole thing is that Optimus wants the Transwarp Key because they can return them to Cybertron. And then at the end, of course, Scourge, before Optimus kills him, destroys the device, the computer, so Elena can't input an access code that would shut down the device. So they have to destroy the Transwarp drive, which is about to suck Optimus up into the sky, and then Primal and Noah save him. And so, like I said, it's very predictable. Like I said, it's just every time they cut back, they spend way too much time with the humans. They don't spend enough time with the Transformer fights and action sequences, which feel about the Bay movies, but they always did that. They always did that the best, I personally think. And yeah, and then you have the stinger at the end, which is one of the most confusing, out of nowhere, like just random inserts. Just be like, hey, not only are we going to be back for a sequel, but we're going to have crossovers with a franchise that, again, I would be remiss if I did not remind people that this is a franchise that existed. G.I. Joe, we get this crossover at the end, which I know that they've been hinting at and trying to do a G.I. Joe Transformers crossover for years. You had a G.I. Joe show that ran on the Hub around the same time that Transformers Prime did. Also, G.I. Joe, another very, very mega popular 80s kid TV show. That is one of the ones that, unlike Transformers and Ninja Turtles, I could never really get into. I saw both the live action movies when they came out in the late 2000s, early 2010s. I enjoyed the first one. Can't say I was a fan of the second one with The Rock and Bruce Willis. So what did you think of the random G.I. Joe insert at the end?
Yeah, a few people have said like, oh my god, the ending is absolutely insane. Like, whoa, what kind of reveal is this? And like, I had seen like a few weeks ago on Twitter, like one of these scoop accounts or whatever, that there's going to be a Transformers and G.I. Joe crossover. Like, that's interesting. And then we turned it over, I'm like, oh yeah, that thing I saw on Twitter 2 weeks ago. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm not a fan of the G.I. Joe things. I haven't seen anything. I just know that there's a man called Joe, maybe,
Yeah.
or maybe
No,
maybe not
actually,
even.
not even. I don't know. I believe he's the name of like the founder of the organization, but yeah, it's an organization called GI Joe. It's like a paramilitary unit, and they fight this terrorist organization called Cobra, and then the leader is Cobra Commander, and then his biggest characteristic is that he sounds like this. And I will come back for the Joes. And they did a very, very funny Community episode where they parodied it. I believe some of the nicknames that they have are you have Roadblock, you have you have Snake Eyes, who is a ninja that is teamed up with them, and a couple of other ones that I cannot remember the name. I believe some of the leaders' names are Duke and Flint. Very, 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 very creative names. The villain names, the members of the Cobra. You have Destro. You have Firefly. Lady Jane, I think, is the name of one of them. Yeah, G.I. Joe was never one that I particularly could get invested in. So I can't say that one got me really excited, where Anthony Ramos is going into this interview with Michael Kelly, which I'm like, okay, since when is Michael Kelly enough of a big name to really like, spark people's interest? But okay, I guess he is. And it's like supposed to be this big reveal where he's like, yes, this is a secret government influx where he, does the thing where he moves a trophy hanging on the wall that opens the wall that reveals this secret, super secret government base where they're working on technology. And I'm like, okay, so Anthony Ramos is getting recruited to GI Joe, and I'm like, okay, that's a thing that happened in this movie. It has
I was
nothing to do with.
hoping it was gonna be like, this is Sector 7, and John Turturro
Yeah,
was gonna be
yeah.
like, "Hi!"
That's what I
But
was hoping
no.
too, or like a younger, like a CG, like younger John Turturro, that would have been fun, because I don't care what anybody said. John Turturro is fantastic in these movies, even if unfortunately Michael Bay was forcing him to, although Michael Bay was just like fucking around with him at a certain point. Let's just he had him get peed on by Bumblebee in the first one. He stuck him underneath a Transformer's actual ball sack in Revenge of the Fallen. He literally cuts off his legs and makes him a paraplegic in 3. And then in the last night, they bring him back for just a little bit, and he's magically walking again, and he's forced to just talk about goat scrotums and shit like that, and John Turturro is such a trooper for dealing with that and consistently being the most entertaining part of these movies. But yeah, so I think that's pretty much wraps our conversation. I feel like that's all that I have to say about Rise of the Beast. So Luke, I mean, as far as like setting up like really any anticipation for these, I feel like I think I should also add by saying that in addition to any future live action Transformers installments that we get, Stephen Caples Jr., the director, he's also the director of Creed 2, has stated that he wants to do that. This was the beginning of a new trilogy, and I'll be interested to see where it goes. But unfortunately, I have to say that if the humans continue to be like the focus of these movies, I can't say that I'm going to remain very interested, because the problem is that we've had enough Transformers properties now where the Transformers are the centerpiece, not the humans. And in the most recent, like I said, I would heavily recommend that if you do want to get more into the Transformers lore, to watch the anime show on Netflix as a Transformers War for Cybertron, with subtitled Siege, Earthrise, and Kingdom. I would definitely recommend that, because I've seen enough Transformers now where there are little to no humans involved, and I have to say that for my money, it is much better and much more engrossing. I should also say that Netflix, in addition, is doing another solo animated film. Actually, sorry, no, not Netflix. A solo animated Transformers film is coming out in theaters, I believe, sometime next year, which will feature an entirely all-star voice cast. I believe you have Chris Hemsworth, Scarlett Johansson, Brian Tyree Henry, Lawrence Fishburne, and a couple of other people.
There was a lot. There was a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. So that will be coming out in theaters next year as well. Just give me 1 second to pull it up, because I never remember the name of it. I think it's Transformers 1 is what it be called. It will be an origin story set on Cybertron, focusing on the origin of Optimus and Megatron. It will star Chris Hemsworth as Optimus Prime, Brian Tyree Henry as Megatron, Scarlett Johansson as Elita 1, Keegan-Michael Key as Bumblebee. Still don't know how I feel about that. And then John Hamm as Sentinel Prime, who was the leader of the Autobots at the time, and then Lawrence Fishburne as Alpha Trion, who is established in the Transformers lore as Optimus Prime's mentor, one of the original 13 Primes. It will be directed by Josh Cooley, the director of Toy Story 4. And so I should also say that will also be a thing that will be happening. That will be released in theaters sometime next year. So with that being said, Luke, what are your final thoughts and star rating for Transformers Rise of the Beasts?
Well, I think with this one, I definitely felt that the viewer demographic is not quite me. It is for a slightly younger audience, so I won't be anticipating the next one too hotly. But the animated movie does sound a lot more interesting. Like we don't know what kind of animation style they're gonna go for. The Spider-Verse influence hopefully will carry through on that. But for
Yes.
this one, yeah, even with lowered expectations, I was a little disappointed. So I landed at a 2.5 out of 5, kind of in the middle of a 2.5.
Yeah, I would tend to go a little bit higher, like I said, because I finally got the Maximals in live action. There was just enough for me to enjoy about this movie. Did not hate it entirely, but not nearly enough to make me love it as much. Like I said, I ranked it like just in the middle. I had the first 4 Bay movies ranked above it, but I ranked above it. But then I had this one ranked above Bumblebee and The Last Night. And of course, I had a bunch of people coming at me for my rankings, and I'm like, guess what? I don't care. So while I enjoyed the Maximals, can't say I was a fan of the humans. I definitely think that going forward, I need my Transformers content to be human free. Because I'm not a fan of it. So I went a full star higher than you. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5. It's not at all the worst movie that I've seen so far this year. It's better than quite a few other movies that I've seen. But I unfortunately cannot say that this will be one of my favorites or making it into my top 10 before the end of the year. So with that being said, thank you, Luke, once again for joining me on this podcast. Like I said, we had to shoot this a little bit earlier because I have a bus to catch right now. But I'm glad that we were able to do this. I'm glad that we were able to join together once again. It'll prove that we once again have more to us than meets the eye. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Yes, it did. We did find a way to pull off it because life finds a way, as one Ian Malcolm would say.
Oh my God.
But no, you can find me at Luk_Reviews on Instagram and YouTube. Exams over soon, so hopefully a video soon. Don't know what about yet, but it'll be something good, I'm sure. Otherwise, you can find me here more often than not.
Indeed, absolutely. Like I said, always happy to have you. As you've pretty much almost been like, it's almost to a point where you're pretty much like the permanent co-host. Not quite. Like I said, there's a few people. It's between you and Dustin at this point. But but like I said, it's getting there in terms of like who's been on more episodes. But of course, you can follow myself at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talking TV podcast across all platforms. Be sure to subscribe to us if you're watching us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow morning. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next weekend for the next installment of the summer series, The Flash.